before Animus Forks became a ghost town. It was a place where men climbed into the San Juan Mountains hoping to trade sweat, blood, and cold for silver. But one winter, a crew of miners never clocked out. More than a century later, 3 ordinary filmmakers drive into that abandoned town to capture a simple travel documentary. By sunset, the empty houses begin to knock, the mine begins to breathe, and an old ledger opens by itself. At Animas Forks, the dead are not resting. They are still working. Animas Forks is a mining ghost town in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado. Situated along the Alpine Loop, a roughly 65-mile dirt road system connecting Lake City, Ouray, and Silverton. The area is promoted by the BLM as a historic attraction, standing at a desolate elevation of approximately 11,200 feet. Local historical sources note that the town thrived during the silver and gold mining boom of the late 19th century. And today, many of its old wooden structures remain preserved and structurally stabilized, standing as silent witnesses to the past. Autumn in Colorado does not arrive with the sound of falling leaves. It arrives with silence, a thin, high silence, stretched across the peaks of the San Juan Mountains, as if the whole sky had been pulled tight over the ridgelines and tied down with cold wind. When Huey's gray Jeep crawled up the rocky road toward Animas Forks, the tires slipped again and again over loose gravel. On both sides of the trail, the slopes were patched with dead yellow grass, old snow clinging in the cuts between rocks, and crooked clusters of dark pine trees bent under a lead-colored sky. Huey had lived in Denver for almost 6 years, but he had never gotten used to the loneliness of these mountains. In the city, emptiness was only the space between buildings. Out here, emptiness breathed. It lay inside the low white mist crawling over the ground. It clung to the warped roofs of wooden houses. It slid through empty window frames, and when the wind pushed through the curled boards, the town gave off a faint moan, like someone trying to call the name of a person who had gone too far to hear. "Beautiful," Grace said from the passenger seat. She was Huey's coworker at a small travel video company in Denver. 32 years old, brown hair tied low, and always wearing an old film camera around her neck, even though the company had moved to digital years ago. Grace loved old places, not because of ghosts. She did not believe in ghosts. She loved places where people had left behind too many traces and not enough witnesses to explain them. Huey glanced at her, beautiful in the kind of way that says we should not be here after dark. Grace smiled. "You say that about every ghost town. Because no ghost town should be visited after dark." In the back seat, Tommy did not laugh. He was the company's new intern, only 3 weeks in. 22, thin, pale from altitude sickness, one arm wrapped around the audio bag and the other hand gripping his phone even though there was no signal at all. "I thought we were only filming during the day," Tommy said. The brief did not say anything about staying until night. Grace looked at Huey, ask our director. Huey exhaled. "We are not staying overnight. We get the golden hour shots, maybe a few twilight plates, and if we move fast, we are back down the mountain by 6:30. This road is hard to drive at night, right?" Tommy asked. "Very hard," Huey said. Tommy went quiet. The Jeep pushed around one last sharp bend. Then Animus Forks appeared. It did not look like a town emerging from the road. It looked like a memory placed in the wrong valley. Weathered gray-brown cabins stood scattered over dead grass. Some still had roofs. Some were only frames, like the rib cages of animals that had died standing up. A dirt road cut through the settlement and disappeared toward bare slopes where tram lines and mine entrances had once bitten into the mountain. There was no large gate, no ticket booth, no crowd, only a few old warning signs, an empty parking area, and the wind. Hui turned off the engine. At once, the silence dropped over them. For the first few seconds, no one spoke. Then, from somewhere far away but strangely clear, came the sound of metal striking stone. Tommy snapped his head around. "Did you hear that?" Grace frowned. "Rockfall." Hui did not answer. He had heard it too, and it had not sounded like falling rock. Falling rock was dull, scattered, uncontrolled. That sound had rhythm, like the stroke of a pickaxe. They had come to Animas Forks to film a short documentary for a series called Forgotten Towns of the West. The client was an adventure tour company hoping to promote the Alpine Loop before the next summer season. The brief was simple: beautiful images, enough history to feel authentic, and no heavy-handed ghost story. But 2 days before the trip, Hui received a private email. The sender was someone named Elias Ward, who claimed to be a volunteer who had once helped stabilize several old buildings at Animas Forks. The message contained only 3 lines. "If you film at Animas Forks, do not only film the Duncan house. Place a recorder near the north tunnel after 5 in the evening. And if you hear the shift bell, leave immediately." Under the message was one attachment, an audio file 17 seconds long. Hui listened to it near midnight in his Denver apartment. At first, there was only wind, then old wood creaked, then came metal, clang, clang, clang. Slow, steady, dry. At the 13th second, a door slammed shut, and at the very end, from far away, came a small bell. Not a church bell, a shift bell, the kind that might have once called men in and out of a mine. Hui almost ignored it. The internet was full of people who enjoyed wrapping ghost stories around abandoned places. But when he replied to ask for more information, the address came back as non-existent. Even stranger, the audio file had no metadata, no creation date, no recording device, no location tag, as if it had never been recorded, as if it had simply appeared. Hui did not tell Grace or Tommy, not because he wanted to seem mysterious, but because he knew Grace would make fun of him and Tommy would insist on turning around. And deep down, Hui was not sure he wanted to know the truth. But standing in Animas Forks, hearing metal echo from the northern slope, he knew he had brought them here because of that email. Not only for the job, because something in this place felt as if it were waiting to be recorded. They began shooting at 3 in the afternoon. Mountain light changes fast. One moment the sky was gray, and 10 minutes later sunlight broke through the clouds, laying a pale golden wash over the old wooden houses like the color of an aged photograph. Grace worked with her usual precision. She filmed close-ups of rusted hinges, wind-smoothed boards, empty window frames looking out into white air. Tommy held the shotgun microphone on the boom, checking levels over and over. Hui delivered a line to camera. Animus Forks was once a place where people came looking for luck, silver, gold, ore, and the dream of a different life. But at more than 11,000 feet, winter was not just weather. It was a sentence. He paused. The wind moved through the cabin behind him and made a loose door tap softly. "Knock." Tommy flinched. Grace lowered the camera. "It is just a door." "I did not say anything," Tommy replied. "Your face said it for you." Hui smiled faintly, but his eyes stayed on the northern slope. A faint trail climbed up toward an old tunnel entrance. On visitor maps, the area was marked as unsafe, partly because of unstable ground, partly because the mine timbers had long since rotted. but the email had named that exact place. The North Tunnel. At 4:10, they entered the large two-story house most visitors liked to photograph. The floor had been reinforced, but it still creaked underfoot. Upstairs, light came through empty windows and stretched in long bands across the walls. Grace raised the camera. "Stand there. Hui, look outside like you are hearing something." Hui obeyed. He stood by the window and looked down at the empty town below. For a few seconds, he had the strange feeling that the cabins were not abandoned at all. The people inside were only standing very still, waiting for strangers to pass. "Rolling," Grace said. Tommy lifted the boom. Hui began. "Some places die loudly in fires, explosions, disease, or war, but some places die slowly. A store closes. Family leaves. A letter is never sent. A final hammer strike is forgotten before anyone can remember whose hand made it." He stopped. From the floor below came the sound of footsteps. Not Grace. She was standing right in front of him. Not Tommy. He was by the door. The footsteps crossed beneath them. Slow. Heavy. One foot dragging slightly behind the other. Tommy went pale. "Is somebody downstairs?" Grace frowned and lowered the camera. Probably another visitor, but the parking area held only their Jeep. Hui signaled for silence and went down the stairs first. The boards groaned under his boots. The ground floor was empty. No person. No fresh footprints in the thin dust near the door. Only something else. In the center of the room, on one of the floorboards, lay a smear of wet mud. Very fresh. Hui crouched. Black mud. Dicky. Speckled with tiny silver grains of crushed stone. Grace stood behind him, her voice lower now. "Maybe one of us tracked it in." "No," Hui said. He lifted the sole of his boot. Their mud was dry and yellowish. This mud was wet, as if it had just been carried out of the earth. Tommy stepped back. "I think we should finish fast and leave." No one disagreed. By 5 o'clock, the light began to change. In the mountains, sunset does not soften. It falls. The peaks above still shone, but the valley floor had turned blue-gray. The wind grew sharper. The same wooden houses that had looked historic an hour before now looked like bodies propped upright. Hui said they needed one final shot near the northern trail. Grace looked at him for a long time. "Are you hiding something from me?" Hui said nothing. Grace knew him too well. They had worked together for 4 years. She knew when he was chasing an idea and when he was chasing an obsession. "Just one shot," Hui said. "You said that before you dragged me into that abandoned asylum in Utah. That video got the best numbers on the channel. And a bat flew into my hair." Tommy stood beside the Jeep, clutching the audio bag. "I vote we go home." Nobody counted Tommy's vote. They walked north. The trail was narrow and full of sharp rock. The higher they climbed, the smaller the town became behind them. Wind moved through the canyon and made a sound like someone whistling through their teeth. A black raven sat on a broken post and watched them with cold round eyes. The north tunnel lay behind a slump of fallen rock. It was not large, only a dark rectangular opening cut into the mountain, framed by rotting timber and half-collapsed warning barriers. In front of it lay rusted scraps of metal, a short length of old rail, and a minecart wheel tilted on its side like an eye torn from its socket. Tommy swallowed. "We are not going in there, right?" "Nobody is going in," Hui said. "I am only setting a recorder outside." "Recorder?" Grace asked. Hui took the small device from his coat pocket. Grace understood immediately. "The email." Hui looked at her. "You knew." "I saw you listening to that file 3 times in the edit room. The volume was high enough for me to hear the clanging from my desk." Tommy looked between them. "What file?" No one answered. Hui placed the recorder on a flat stone near the tunnel mouth and turned on continuous recording. The screen showed a low waveform, only wind. Grace began filming the tunnel from a distance. Hui stood off to one side, ready to record a backup narration. Then a sound came from inside the tunnel. Clang. Tommy dropped a lens cap. Grace did not lower the camera. Clang. Clang. 3 strikes. Slow. Steady. Closer than the audio file. The skin on the back of Hui's neck turned cold. "There is someone in there," Tommy whispered. "Impossible," Grace said, but her voice had lost its certainty. A breath of cold air rolled out of the tunnel. It smelled of wet rock, rusted metal, and something faint but unmistakable. Lamp smoke. Hui looked at the recorder screen. The waveform jumped with every strike. Clang, clang, clang. Then, from the town behind them, a door slammed. Bang. All 3 turned. The sound echoed across the valley. Not a loose door shifting in the wind. A door pulled shut by a hand. Tommy began to shake. "Hui, can we leave now?" Hui picked up the recorder. He meant to stop it, but the screen flickered. The waveform went wild. From the little speaker, even though he had not pressed playback, came a man's voice. A hoarse voice, as if there were earth packed inside the throat. "Shift's not over." Grace stepped back. Tommy whispered, "What did it say?" Hui had heard it clearly. "The shift is not over." Inside the tunnel, the metal sound stopped. The silence thickened. Then a bell rang. Ding. Small, far away, perfectly clear. Grace shut off the camera. Down the mountain. Out. This time, nobody argued. They returned to town as fast as they could. But descending was harder than climbing. Stones rolled under their feet. Tommy slipped twice. Grace hauled him up, looking back again and again toward the tunnel. When they reached the parking area, the Jeep was still there. But something was wrong. The driver's door was open. Hui remembered locking it. Tommy reached it first, then froze. Hui. Inside the Jeep, everything remained. Bags, spare batteries, memory cards, water bottles. Nothing had been taken, except the key. Hui checked his coat pocket. Empty. His pants pockets. Empty. The camera bag. Empty. Grace opened the back and searched every compartment. Nothing. Tommy started breathing too fast. "This is not funny. Whoever took it, just give it back." The wind answered with a long shriek through the cabins. Hui forced himself to stay calm. He remembered putting the key into the left pocket of his coat after turning off the engine. The pocket had a zipper. The zipper was still closed. Grace looked toward town. "Someone is here." Hui shook his head. "There are no other vehicles." Then the key walked away by itself. No one could answer. Darkness was coming fast. The temperature was dropping by the minute. There was no phone signal. The Jeep's radio picked up only static. Hui took out a flashlight. "We search around the vehicle first. It may have fallen when we were unloading gear." Tommy gave a dry laugh. "You are lying to keep me calm, right?" "Yes," Hui said. "But we still have to search." They searched around the parking area, under the seats, inside the equipment bags, and along the path to the nearest cabin. No key. Then Grace shone her flashlight toward the 2-story house where they had filmed earlier, and stopped. There. Hui followed the beam of light. On the front step of the house, a small piece of metal reflected the flashlight. The Jeep key. It lay neatly on the threshold. Beside it was a wet black stone, speckled with silver. Hui moved toward it. The closer he came, the more clearly he heard a sound inside the house. Not footsteps, not wind, paper turning, rustle. Slowly, as if someone were reviewing a ledger. Grace caught Hui's arm. "Do not go in. The key is right there. Then take it and leave." Hui bent and picked it up. The moment his fingers touched the metal, the front door opened. Creak. A black crack appeared inside. From the darkness came a dry cough. Tommy screamed. Hui snatched the key and stumbled back. The door did not open wider. It only remained cracked, as if inviting them inside. Grace dragged Hui back to the Jeep. All three piled in. Hui shoved the key into the ignition and turned. The engine did not start. Only a weak clicking. "No, no, no," Tommy muttered. "Not like a movie. Please, not like a movie." Hui tried again. Click, click, nothing. The dashboard blinked, then went dead. Outside, night fully settled. And Animus Forks began to wake. The first sound came from the small cabin near the parking area. Like a hammer on wood. Then from the two-story house. A door opening, a door closing. From the main road. The rattle of a mine cart rolling over rails, even though no track had crossed the street for generations. Tommy covered his ears. This cannot be real. Grace stared through the windshield. The cabins remained dark. No figures, no lanterns, but the sounds were everywhere. A town with no people was working. Hui lifted the recorder. It was still recording. The screen showed more than 40 minutes of audio, but he was sure it had been running for less than 20. The memory card read full, then empty, then full again. The numbers jumped as if something inside the device were changing them. Suddenly, the Jeep radio came on. Static filled the cabin. Then a man's voice pushed through the speakers. Not clear like a broadcast. Buried, as if trapped under layers of dirt and stone. Crew 7, North Drift, water rising. Grace whispered, "Is that a rescue channel?" Hui did not answer. The voice continued in broken pieces. "Do not send the boys. Tell Ward, bell at 6. Tommy turned to Hui. "Ward? Like the email?" Hui tightened his grip on the recorder. Elias Ward, the sender who did not exist. The radio hissed louder. A strike of metal crashed through the speakers, making the cabin vibrate. Then many voices spoke at once. Not screaming, counting. 1, 2, 3. Clang. 1, 2, 3. Clang. Like a crew of miners striking stone together. Grace opened the door. "We are not safe in here. If the Jeep will not start, we need a cabin with walls. We wait until morning." Tommy stared at her as if she had lost her mind. "You think a haunted house is safer than the car? Out here, the cold can kill us before anything else gets a chance." Hui knew she was right. They gathered flashlights, spare batteries, a dead radio, a first aid kit, and a few energy bars. Hui took the recorder. Grace looked at it. "You are still bringing that thing? It may be recording proof, or it may be the reason we are being held here." Hui did not answer because he was starting to think the same thing. They chose a small cabin near the parking area with walls mostly intact. Inside was one empty room, a few support beams, a dusty floor, and the smell of old wood. Grace wedged a backpack under the door so the wind could not blow it open. Tommy sat curled in the corner, hugging his flashlight like a charm. Hui placed the recorder in the middle of the room. "Do not," Grace said. "Just listen." He played back the file from the tunnel. First wind, then pick strikes. Clang, clang, clang. Then the man's voice. "Shift's not over." Grace closed her eyes. Tommy shook his head. "No, turn it off." But the file kept playing. At the point where they had heard only the bell in person, the recording held more. Water dripping, timber cracking, men breathing hard. Then a younger voice, very close to the microphone, whispered, "Do not let the book leave." Hui stopped the playback. "Book?" Grace asked. "A ledger," Tommy said. Hui remembered the sound of paper turning inside the two-story house. Near 7 o'clock, the sounds stopped. The whole town went silent. No wind, no creaking wood, no metal, an impossible quiet. Then the bell rang from the two-story house. Tommy began to cry. The email said, "If we hear the bell, we leave." Grace said softly, "We cannot leave." As the last bell faded, someone knocked on the cabin door 3 times. Not hard, not threatening, polite, like a foreman calling workers. No one moved. 3 more knocks. Then a man's voice outside said, "Late." Tommy buried his face in his knees. Grace pointed her flashlight at the door. "We are not going into the mine. We will leave when the sun comes up." Silence outside. Then the voice replied, "Late men lose wages." Cold traveled up Hui's spine. Not because of the words, because the voice was the same one from the recorder. The door was knocked again, harder now. From far away, other knocks answered. From empty houses, from the old storehouse, from the main road, from the north tunnel. The whole town knocked in one rhythm. Grace pulled Hui and Tommy back into the corner. But the door did not burst open. Instead, something slid under it. A small leather-bound book. So old the spine was nearly gone. There was no title on the cover. Only a round burn mark, as if the bottom of an oil lamp had once been set on it. Hui did not want to touch it, but the recorder in the middle of the room turned on by itself. The younger voice came through the speaker. "Do not let the book leave." Grace looked at the book. "If they do not want it to leave, why give it to us?" Hui swallowed. Maybe it already left. He opened it. The first pages were work records. Names of miners, hours or weight, wages. Slanted handwriting, brown faded ink, many lines blurred by water. Tommy aimed the flashlight with shaking hands. Hui turned toward the end. The handwriting changed there, faster, deeper. In places, the pen had dug into the paper. October 17th. Wind changed. Water sounds at North Tunnel. Ward says crew still goes down. 3 men refused. Wages cut. October 18th. Good or in North Drift. Ward kept men after 6 bell. McCall coughing blood. Avery's boy brought bread. Not allowed inside. October 19th. Timber complained all day. No one allowed out. Ward keeping the wage ledger. Grace frowned. Ward was the mine boss? Hui turned the page. October 20th. Collapse. 1 word. Under it, several lines had been scratched almost unreadable. On the next page, the writing became worse. It was no accident. Ward heard the rock all morning. He locked the lower gate. Said any man leaving before shift would not be paid. 19 men still inside. 6 bell was not quitting time. It was when he closed the ledger. Tommy whispered, 19 men. Hui's throat went dry. He turned to the final page. Only a list of names. 19 names. Some crossed out. Some marked with black fingerprints. At the bottom was a line written in dark red ink. Whoever keeps the ledger takes attendance. Whoever takes attendance must call every man home. Grace finished reading and went pale. Put it back under the door. Tommy nodded immediately. Yes, give it back. But Hui did not move. Because on that last page, under the 19 names, a new line appeared. The ink was wet. Hui Transsound. Below Hui's name, the writing continued 1 stroke at a time. Grace Miller Camera. Tommy screamed when his name began to form. Thomas Reed Runner. The ledger fell to the floor. Outside, the knocking stopped. Then every building in Animas Forks filled with footsteps. Not wandering footsteps. Footsteps going to work. They ran. Grace kicked the backpack away from the door and rushed out first. Hui dragged Tommy after her. Snow dust lashed their faces, cold as needles. Their flashlights cut through the dark, but the beams seemed shorter now, lighting only a few yards ahead. The town had changed. There were no visible people, but everything was moving. A cabin door to the left opened and closed. An iron hook on a wall swung back and forth. The old minecart will near the storehouse rolled half a turn and shrieked. In the two-story house, a weak yellow glow appeared in an upper window, like an oil lamp. Grace shouted, "The Jeep!" Hui knew it was useless, but they had no other option. When they reached it, the bell rang from the north tunnel. Ding. Not distant this time. Every chime made the ground tremble under their boots. Tommy fell. Hui turned and pulled him up. In that instant, he saw the thin snow behind them covered in footprints. Old boot prints, wet with black mud, moving beside them, but no one was there. Grace reached the Jeep first, opened the door, and yelled, "Key!" Hui threw it. She turned the ignition. The engine did not start. Tommy slapped the dashboard. "Please, please." The radio came alive. The sound of many men breathing filled the cabin. Then the foreman's voice said, "Names in the book." Hui looked down. The ledger was in his hands. He did not remember picking it up when they ran. But there it was. Grace saw it. "You brought it." "I did not." "Give it to me." She grabbed the ledger and tried to throw it out of the Jeep. The moment it left her hand, the door slammed shut. Bang. All the doors had sealed from the inside. On the windshield, condensation began to form. Not from them, from outside. One muddy handprint appeared on the glass. Then another. Then another. Soon, hands surrounded the Jeep. They did not pound. They did not claw. They only held it, like workers holding a minecart in place. Inside Hui's head, a voice spoke. Not through the radio. Not through the recorder. Right beside his ear. "Call them back." He understood. The ledger was not just a curse. It was a timesheet. 19 men had died because they were forced to keep working after a shift that should have ended. When they died, no one marked them as gone home. So Animus Forks kept working. Not because the dead wanted to, because in the ledger their shift had never ended. "I have to read their names," Hui said. Grace stared at him. "What?" "I have to call them home." The last line said it. "Whoever keeps the ledger takes attendance." Hui opened the ledger under the flashlight. The pages flipped by themselves to the final list. 19 names shivered on the paper like insects. Outside, the sound of metal grew louder. Clang, clang, clang. From far away, near the north tunnel, came the sound of timber breaking, as if the collapse were happening all over again. Hui read the first name, Samuel Avery. The wind screamed outside. One handprint vanished from the glass. He read the next, Patrick McCall. The pick strikes paused for one beat. Jonah Briggs. A door somewhere in town closed more softly than before. Grace understood. She leaned in and held the flashlight steady. "Keep reading." Hui read, name after name. Each time he read one sound in the town stopped. The hammering, the cartwheels, the chains, the doors. One by one, the men were finally allowed to leave work. At the 17th name, Tommy suddenly said, "Wait." Hui looked at him. Tommy pointed at the page. Two names are blurred together. You read it wrong. The ink had smeared into a black streak. Hui had almost read it as Henry Cole, but Tommy held the flashlight closer. It was not Henry Cole. It was Elias Ward. Grace frowned. Ward? But Ward was the foreman. Hui felt cold open in his stomach. He looked back at the earlier pages. Ward made them work late. Ward kept the ledger. Ward locked the gate. But if Elias Ward was on the list of the dead, then who had locked them inside? The ledger flipped itself to a previous page, to the lines that had been scratched out. In the trembling flashlight beam, the scratches were no longer random marks. They were words someone had tried to erase. Hui brushed away dust with his thumb. A sentence appeared. Elias Ward tried to open the lower gate. Foreman Bell shot him. Bell took the ledger. Bell said dead men need no wages. Grace read softly, Foreman Bell. Tommy whispered, not Ward. Hui remembered the email. Elias Ward, not the villain, the man who had tried to warn them. And the bell at 6 was not only a bell. Bell was a name. Foreman Bell. At that moment, the Jeep radio came on again. A different voice spoke. Not hoarse like a miner. Deep, cold, clear. Wrong name. From the two-story house, the oil lamp glow burned brighter. In the upper window, a figure appeared. No face. Only a hat and a rigid posture like someone used to giving orders. Grace gripped Hui's arm. Read Ward. Hui read loudly. Elias Ward. A long breath passed outside the Jeep. Not sad. Not relieved. Like a man who had been holding air for more than a century. Only two names remained. Hui looked down. The 18th was Nathan Bell. The last was not a miner's name. It appeared as he watched. Black ink flowed out of the paper like blood. Foreman Nathaniel Bell, unclosed. Outside, the figure vanished from the upstairs window. Then the front door of the two-story house burst open. Heavy footsteps started down the stairs. Slow, one step at a time. Grace said, "Read it." Hui opened his mouth, but his throat locked shut, not from fear, because an invisible hand was squeezing his neck. The recorder in his coat pocket turned on by itself, playing the voice from the emailed file. Bell at 6. Tommy screamed, "Read his name before the 6 bells." The bell rang. Ding. 1. The hand around Hui's throat tightened. Grace grabbed the ledger and shouted, "Nathaniel Bell!" Nothing happened. The second bell rang. Ding. The radio roared. Wrong voice. Hui understood. He was the one holding the ledger. He was the one taking attendance. Only his voice counted. Grace grabbed his face and forced him to look at her. Hui breathed. "Read it." The third bell rang. Ding. Hui pulled a thin breath through his crushed throat. The fourth bell rang. Ding. The fifth bell rang. Ding. Hui forced out the words. "Nathaniel Bell." Silence. No wind. No bell. No breathing. The hand around his throat disappeared. From the two-story house came the sound of a door closing. Not violently, gently, as if the last person had finally left the room. On the windshield, every muddy handprint melted into water. The Jeep's electrical system lit up. Grace turned the key. This time, the engine started. No one spoke. Grace turned the Jeep around in the narrow dirt lot. Hui clutched the ledger. Tommy stared through the rear window. As they drove out of Animas Forks, Hui saw 19 shadows standing in a row on the main road. No faces, no clear clothing, only dark, exhausted shapes with their heads lowered after a long day's labor. One man stood apart from the others. He wore an old hat and held an oil lamp. As the jeep passed, he lifted the lamp, not as a warning, as thanks. Then all of them disappeared into the snow. They reached Silverton close to midnight. Tommy vomited at the roadside. Grace called local police, then a tow service to inspect the jeep. Of course, no one believed the story. A rescue worker suggested the battery had been weakened by cold. The doors had jammed from ice, and the metal sounds were wind moving through old structures. Huey did not argue. He only asked one question. Was there ever a man named Elias Ward working at Animus Forks? The rescue worker, who had been smiling, suddenly stopped. He said he was not sure. But his grandfather had once mentioned an old tunnel collapse somewhere near the northern workings. Records from that era were incomplete because mining companies often hid accidents to avoid paying families. What about Nathaniel Bell? Grace asked. The man shook his head. Bell? Never heard that name. But the next morning, at a small historical archive in Silverton, Grace found a badly digitized newspaper clipping. It did not mention a tunnel collapse. It mentioned a mine foreman named Nathaniel Bell, who disappeared during a late 19th century winter while holding the wage ledger for a mining crew. The company reported that Bell had left town for personal reasons. No body was ever found. No one mentioned the 19 miners. Huey opened his bag. The ledger was gone. Only the recorder remained. The recording from the night before was still there. But when they played it, there were no ghostly voices. No bell. No doors. No metal. Only Huey reading 19 names. And after each name, very softly, a man answered, "Here." Present. As in a final roll call. Grace turned it off. "We are not posting this." Huey nodded. "We are not posting this." Tommy quit the company that afternoon. No one blamed him. 3 weeks later, Huey was back in Denver trying to live normally. He edited the Animas Forks video exactly as the client had requested. Beautiful landscapes, old mining history, sunset over weathered cabins, and a light mention of local ghost stories. No North Tunnel, no ledger, no shift bell. The client approved it immediately. Grace never brought up that night. Tommy moved back to Oregon, and Huey began to lose sleep. Not every night. Only around 6 o'clock in the evening, Colorado time, wherever he was. From far away, he would hear metal strike stone. Clang. At first, he told himself it was memory. Then one evening in the edit room, while cutting footage for another project, his computer opened the Animus Forks folder by itself. A new audio file had appeared. Its name was shift_complete.wave. Huey stared at it for a long time. Then he played it. No pickaxe, no door, no bell, only mountain wind and a familiar man's voice. Elias Ward. "Thank you." Huey thought the file ended there, but after 3 seconds of silence, another sound came through. Paper turning. Rustle. Then a deep, cold, perfectly clear voice. Nathaniel Bell. New ledger opened. The computer screen went black. In the reflection on the dark monitor, Huey did not see the Denver edit room behind him. He saw the 2-story house at Animas Forks. The empty window, the yellow oil lamp, snow dust moving across the floor, and on a rotted wooden table, a new ledger lay open. The first page held 3 lines. Grace Miller camera, Thomas Reed runner, Huey trans sound. Below them, a 4th line was being written in wet black ink. Next crew due at 6. Huey spun around. The edit room was empty, but on the glass door behind him, a muddy handprint had just appeared from the other side. A voice spoke from the dark hallway. Not the voice of the miners. Not Elias Ward. Hui's own voice came from the recorder on the desk. The shift is not over. Hui stood frozen. On the dead computer screen, his reflection slowly lowered its head, like a worker hearing the bell call him back underground. Somewhere inside the locked room, metal struck stone. Clang. One beat. Clang. A second beat. Clang. The third. And this time, after every strike, came the sound of paper turning. Rustle. A new page. A new name. A new shift. From the hallway, the voice whispered one last time. The new shift has begun. If this story kept you listening until the final knock, let me know in the comments. Would you open the ledger, or would you leave before the bell rang? Subscribe to Infinite Story Realm. For more true places, dark legends, and stories where the past is never as dead as it looks. And remember, if you ever hear metal striking stone in an empty ghost town, do not answer the roll call.